Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. I am incredibly excited to say that I get to talk about the remaster of Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne today. Preview embargo on this has lifted, so I'm able to show you footage from the first couple of hours of play and talk about that first little block of the game. I haven't played beyond that, so that is all I can talk about, but this game is a big deal to me, and after getting some hands-on time with it now, I can say that it definitely holds up, and I am getting some incredibly strong waves of nostalgia as I play through. Before I talk about the game itself though, I do want to quickly share an anecdote as a bit of fun, because it actually explains why this game means so much to me anyway. Way back now, when I was just starting out in games writing, my first paid gig was with the official PlayStation 2 magazine here in Australia. One of the first games I got to play as a freelancer there, because nobody else wanted to touch it, it was a JRPG and therefore a long thing, was Shin Megami Tensei, Lucifer's Call as it was known in Australia then. I can't remember the score that I gave it, though as a hazy guess I'd say it was probably about an 8 or a 9 out of 10 or whatever the scoring system was back then. But the review obviously impressed the publisher, because when I went to buy myself a copy of the game later, and back in those days you didn't get to keep the games that you reviewed, there was a quote from my review on the back of the box, and I was right chuffed about that. Of course, I was a young games writer, and that was the first time that my work had been cited on anything. So anyhow, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne really does hold up. Once again, I can only directly talk about the first 3 hours or so of the game in the preview, and as a result, I can't really discuss my favourite bits about the game, but this is still an exquisitely dark and melancholic experience. And because it was always a game that preferenced art style over technical details, it still looks gorgeous. So even when the sprucing up that has been done for this remaster isn't much more than bringing it all into HD, this game really is a feast for the eyes, and it is immediately engaging, and it feels very modern because of its themes and stuff. So since I can't talk about specific details with this remaster at this stage, what I'll do instead is talk more generally about what it was that I loved so much about Nocturne. The hyper-stylized cel-shaded graphics were certainly a big part of it. They were not as detailed as what we were seeing with the likes of Final Fantasy X back in those days, but the art direction in portraying this really dark apocalypse where very few humans remain and those that are a prey for demons, that was a very different JRPG to the kind of colourful, bright games that dominated the genre back in those days, particularly in Australia. We didn't get a lot of JRPGs localized and released in Australia back then, and those that were tended to be the big budget ones like Final Fantasies. So these kinds of grungy, underground style JRPGs like Shin Megami Tensei, we didn't get to play too many of those. This was different. The grungy style of the combat and the underground music soundtrack was all incredibly appealing because it was so different. And as a Pokemon fan, I was also instantly sold on the ability to recruit the demons that I was fighting into my growing army as I went along. Some of those demons were also incredibly sexy too. One of the earlier examples, I guess, of fan service that I played. So that made this a very adult game for a time where adult games were not that common themselves, for again the same reasons. Especially in JRPGs, we just didn't get the ones that push those boundaries. So Shin Megami Tensei was in many ways something that I hadn't really experienced much of back in those days. I found all of this very atmospheric, is what I'm saying. There was screams of rage in combat, there was this heavy synthesized music and rock guitars at play that made me looking forward to every combat that I got involved in. When I first played this game, I was also going through this phase in which I'd watch The Crow on an almost weekly basis, so what this game was offering really matched nicely with my sense of aesthetics at that point in time. And this game, just the narrative went to some really dark places. Back in those days, I wasn't so attuned to or particularly interested in philosophy in my games or stories. I hadn't really done much study of deeper narrative themes that I would do later on at university when I first played Nocturne, so it wasn't particularly receptive to the deeper implications of the game's darkly nihilistic themes, its sense of existentialist dread, or many of the spiritual themes that would occur across the Shin Megami Tensei series. What I did notice were the cults and the fact that you'd been turned into a half-demon with neon glowing skin, and the decrepit environments that you'd explore as you picked your way through train stations, buildings and the like. I liked all of that. I didn't really understand it, and I wasn't really keen on analysing it as I played along, but it certainly got its hooks into me, and I found it all very appealing. Actually, one of the things that I am most interested in as I replay this time around is just what that greater awareness that I have of narrative and context and so on will allow me to take out of this game this time. Already, from the first 3 hours alone, I'm finding the writing much more intense and engaging, because those religious themes and the deconstruction that goes on is just much more interesting as I pick it apart. And I'm also finding the surrealistic notes there to be fascinating. So the various ghostly guides that appear and disappear, such as the old woman and the young boy, or the wheelchair-bound man, are much more interesting when I'm actually understanding or thinking about them as I see them on the screen, rather than just accepting them as a bit of narrative to drive the game forward. I'm finding this all to be much more purposeful and potent than I did the first time around, is what I'm saying. So picking this one apart as I play along is going to be a real joy. As far as the gameplay goes, I can't talk much about the bosses at this preview stage, unfortunately, but I do remember them being an absolute highlight in Nocturne, so I'm looking forward to seeing them again. The part of the game that I have been able to talk about and play through so far has just the one boss, which is that giant stingray that you would have seen in the footage as you've been watching. And that one boss was enough to remind me that this game can be challenging. Brutally challenging, nihilistically challenging, if you want to say it that way. This is actually one of the most difficult turn-based JRPGs ever made, and it is quite notorious for that. And that seems to be preserved, which is good. The other good news, though, is that there is an easy mode this time around for people that are more interested in just playing it through for the story. I've not tested that mode out yet myself, and it doesn't really interest me, to be honest, because for me, Nocturne asks players to suffer through a certain intensity with the difficulty, because that goes with its nihilistic themes and so on and so forth. So I'm happy to play the game on its own terms. However, I am glad that that easy mode is there for the other players, because ultimately I do think that this is a game that everybody should play, and if an easy mode is what a player needs to be able to enjoy this game, then it's so much better. It just means that there are more people that are going to be able to experience this excellent story. While I am on that note, it is going to be interesting to see if this game catches the eye of the new Atlas fans who came to Atlas by way of Persona 5. I suspect some will try it out, because it is well known that Persona is a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei series, and some people will be curious about their favourite JRPG's roots. It is also the first Shin Megami Tensei title to be released since Persona 5, so it's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for the series for those new Atlas fans. I don't think that Nocturne is going to hold the same broad appeal by any means. I don't think it's going to sell anywhere near as well as Persona 5, of course, and that's not just because as a HD remaster it looks a little bit primitive by comparison. The basic reality is that it is just far too suffocating and dense in its themes, and where Persona had all the pretty characters, the fan service, the dates and its humour, it had Anne, because Anne is just all of those things and then some. Nocturne is much more relentless and pure, and right from the start, just from the first 3 or so hours of play that I've had, I am reminded that it is esoteric to the point that it will lose some people. Now, of course, I'm not saying any of that to discourage people from playing this game. My review is on the back of the box of the original release, after all. I definitely am an advocate for Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, and unless the developers have somehow changed it into something I don't remember from this point out, I am going to be very positive with it in my review once embargo on that lifts. Nocturne's vision is so strong and compelling that it is one of those games as art things that I love to natter on about, and I am looking forward to diving much more deeply into it, but a consequence of it being such a strong and loud work of art is that there are going to be some people that don't get along with it, and people who go into it expecting it to be like Persona are probably the ones who are most likely to be disappointed. If you're looking for something light and bubbly, this game is not going to be it, but if you are looking for something reflective, intelligent and meaningful, then I do think that this game is just a remarkable bit of art. Anyway, that is enough for this video at this point in time. I will of course have a full review of this up once embargo on the review lifts, and I will have plenty more to say at that point. But in the meantime, do let me know your own thoughts about this game if you have played it in the comments. I would very much like to chat with people about it, and if you have any questions that I can answer at this point in time, feel free to reach out. Please do click that like and subscribe button if you enjoy my videos. That way you will get them all as soon as I upload them. And if you do enjoy my work, please do consider backing me on Patreon. You can do so for just $1 a month or more if you are feeling generous, and in return you do get access to a magazine that I am now publishing. We've got a digital magazine that goes up each month that is exclusive to Patreon backers as my way of saying thank you for your support, but that support does help me also grow this channel and everything else that I'm doing. So thank you again, as always, for watching, and we will see you at the next video.